The smell of grilled corn and marinated chicken hung in the air, mixing with the chatter of a dozen relatives catching up over plastic cups of lemonade. I had just set my plate down when Ryan, my cousin, 2 years older, always loudest, me, across the lawn. He waved big, the way a politician might acknowledge someone in a crowd, and called out, "Hey, still working that dead-end job of yours?" Heads turned. His voice carried too well, slicing through the hum of conversation. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, though I forced a thin smile. "I like what I do," I said, aiming for evenness. But Ryan wasn't finished. Sure, he chuckled, stepping closer. "But come on, filing papers and answering phones all day. You're too smart for that. Or maybe not." His laugh landed like a slap, and I noticed Uncle Dean smirking, Aunt Paula hiding hers behind a sip of wine. A few cousins exchanged glances, the kind that says they're relieved not to be the target. My fork hovered over my plate, appetite gone. I could have walked away, but I stayed, nodding vaguely as he launched into a story about his latest promotion, sprinkling in numbers and titles, as if reading from a resume. Every detail felt chosen to underline the gap between us. When his girlfriend joined in, it must be nice, having such an easy job with no stress. The laughter swelled again. I laughed too, a short, hollow sound, because the alternative was letting them see the sting. The taste of the potato salad turned to chalk in my mouth. I caught my mother's concerned glance from across the yard and shook my head just enough to keep her seated somewhere deep inside. Beneath the embarrassment, something sharp and steady took root. I didn't know it yet, but this moment would replay in my mind long after the paper plates were tossed and the grill went cold. The sun was still high when I told my mother I wasn't feeling well. She reached for my arm, searching my face, but I slipped into the shade before anyone else could notice. Laughter still drifted from the backyard, carried on the smell of smoke and barbecue sauce. I took my time crossing the lawn, each step slow, as if moving too quickly might betray the urgency in my chest. My car was parked down the street, so I could leave without weaving through the crowd. Unlocking the door, I caught my reflection in the window, a faint smile plastered over eyes that looked tired, smaller somehow. The humiliation had followed me like static, clinging to my skin. I sat behind the wheel, hands resting on the steering wheel, for a moment too long, trying to will the sting to fade. But under the sting was something else, something clean, cold, like the first breath after a plunge into icy water. His words, meant to keep me small, had lodged in me differently. They weren't just an insult, they were a dare. I started the engine, the hum filling the quiet space around me. As the street rolled by, I replayed his smirk, the tilt of his head, the chorus of chuckles. It was no longer embarrassment I felt, but the faint spark of a but alive. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the decision was sealed. I wouldn't correct him, wouldn't argue, wouldn't offer any defense. Instead, I'd let time and my own work make the statement for me. One day, when the pieces were in place, my answer would be undeniable. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The hum of fluorescent lights was the soundtrack to another Monday. My cubicle walls, a tired gray, were dotted with curling post-it notes that had long outlived their usefulness. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the break room, a scent that clung no matter how many air fresheners the receptionist plugged in. I powered up my aging desktop, the fan wheezing like it was doing me a favor. My inbox was already full of requests that weren't mine, forwarded by people who knew I wouldn't push back. The pay barely covered rent, but the workload was endless, and the thanks were rare enough to be memorable. At 10 sharp, Mr. Langley stopped by. He leaned against my cubicle's entrance, his tie crooked, his expression faintly amused. "Need those reports by lunch," he said, as if it were a casual reminder and not a last-minute demand. He didn't wait for a response before strolling away, calling out a joke to someone in accounting. I opened the spreadsheets, the cells blurring into a monotony of numbers. Every click of the keyboard felt like a reminder of the conversation at the BBQ, Ryan's voice curling through the memory. Dead-end job. No stress. Outside my cubicle, laughter rose from a small group near the copier. I kept my head down, the glow of the monitor washing my face in cold light. I'd become good at disappearing in plain sight. But somewhere beneath the routine, under the weight of the day's sameness that sparked from the weekend, still smoldered. I didn't know when I'd strike the match, but I knew I wouldn't be here forever. The bell over the cafe door chimed as I stepped inside, shaking off the stale office air. The place smelled of fresh espresso and warm pastries. A welcome break from recycled air and printer toner. I spotted Emma in our usual corner, already halfway through a cappuccino. Her scarf tossed carelessly over the back of the chair. "You look like someone stole your weekend," she said as I sat down. I managed to laugh, though it felt thin. "Feels like they stole the whole year." I wrapped my hands around the mug the barista set down, letting the heat soak into my fingers. Emma tilted her head, waiting. She was the kind of friend who didn't rush you, but her silence was often more persuasive than questions. "I'm stuck," I admitted. "Every day feels the same. I go in, do work, no one notices, and go home just tired enough to repeat it all again. And then I get to hear from Ryan about how I'll never amount to much." His name tasted bitter in my mouth. She frowned. "You're not stuck. You're just parked. You've always had more in you than that job will ever see." I looked down at the swirl in my coffee, hesitant to let the thought fully form. "Maybe," I said slowly, "but what if I could do more than just scrape by? What if I could actually outgrow all of it?" Her eyes sharpened. "Then you need to stop talking like it's a dream and start acting like it's a plan." Outside, the afternoon light caught the window in a way that made the street shimmer. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest shift, not enough to move mountains, but enough to know they weren't immovable. I almost didn't stop at the farmer's market that Saturday. My fridge was already stocked, and I was halfway home when the smell of fresh bread pulled me in. I wandered between stalls, letting the hum of casual conversation and the colors of ripe produce wash over me. When a voice called my name, it took a second to place her Maya, from my first job out of college. Back then, we'd both been assistants, surviving on cheap coffee and late-night takeout. But now, she looked different, more certain, more alive. We caught up over a stand selling local honey. She told me she'd left her corporate job 2 years ago to start a sustainable packaging company. It was terrifying, she admitted, but I was tired of working for people whose values didn't match mine. Her eyes lit up as she described landing her first big contract, hiring her own team, seeing her company name on a trade show banner. There was no arrogance in her voice, just the kind of pride that comes from building something real. I listened, nodding, but inside, something tightened. It wasn't jealousy, exactly, it was recognition. She wasn't any smarter than I was back when we shared that cramped cubicle. The difference was, she'd done something about it. Before we parted, she scribbled her email on the back of a flyer. "If you ever think about doing your own thing, call me. I've made every mistake in the book, so I can help you avoid a few." As I walked back to my car, the paper warm in my pocket, the hum of the market faded into the background. I couldn't stop thinking about how her voice had sounded clear, steady, entirely her own. For the first time, I wondered if mine could sound like that too. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. I typed "how to start a business" into the search bar, fully expecting to skim for a few minutes before bed. Hours slipped away without my noticing. I devoured articles on market gaps, startup funding, and business models. One link led to another, case studies of founders who'd built companies from nothing. Interviews with entrepreneurs who spoke about failure like it was a teacher, not a sentence. I scribbled notes on scrap paper. Ideas, terms I didn't yet understand, questions I needed answered. By midnight, my small apartment felt like a command center. Tabs were open to leadership books, online courses, podcasts with titles that made me sit straighter. I watched videos of speeches by people who had once been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. Their stories felt like secret blueprints. Every so often, Ryan's voice would float back to me. "Dead-end job," and I'd feel the flicker of something sharper than embarrassment. Not anger exactly, but propulsion. Around 2 a.m, I closed the last tab and leaned back. My eyes burned, but my mind buzzed like I'd just downed 3 aspirin. I wasn't ready to quit my job tomorrow. But the thought no longer felt impossible. The difference between me and the people I'd read about wasn't luck or genius, it was the decision to begin. And for the first time in years, I knew that beginning was no longer a matter of if, but when. The letter sat folded in my bag for 3 days before I worked up the nerve. Every time I touched it, my stomach tightened. But the thought of another year behind that cubicle wall felt heavier than the fear. That Monday, I arrived early, the office still quiet except for the soft whir of the copy machine. I walked past Mr. Langley's door twice before finally stopping. He was at his desk, scrolling through something on his phone. "I need to give you this," I said, placing the envelope in front of him. My voice was steady, though my palms were damp. He raised an eyebrow, slid a finger under the flap, and scanned the single sentence inside. "You're leaving." "I am." He leaned back, as if amused. "And what will you do?" "I'll figure it out," I said. He smirked. The same look Ryan wore at the BB. And for a second I felt the familiar burn of being underestimated. But it didn't land the same way this time. I'd already decided. "Your choice," he said, returning to his phone. I walked back to my desk, lighter than I had in years. Fear was still there. Yes, but it was finally sharing space with something stronger. The first week after quitting felt like stepping onto a tightrope without a net. I turned my spare bedroom into an office, just a desk, a second-hand chair, and a whiteboard covered in half-formed ideas. The silence was both freeing and unnerving. I filed paperwork I barely understood, registering a name that felt strange on my tongue but right in my gut. My savings account shrank with every software, subscription, license fee, and bulk order of supplies. Even the smallest expenses made me wince. But I told myself it was an investment, not a loss. When I explained my plans to old coworkers over lunch, the reactions were mixed. Brave, some said, though their eyes flickered with doubt. Others didn't bother to hide it. "You know most new businesses fail, right?" one asked, half smiling, as if offering a friendly warning. Nights were long. I built a website from scratch, watched tutorials on marketing strategies, cold emailed potential clients who didn't respond. Some days, my to-do list shrank. Other days, it grew faster than I could keep up. Still, there were small wins. Stranger signing up for my mailing list, a supplier offering me a discount, the first time my logo appeared on a sample product. They were tiny sparks, but they kept the darkness from settling in. I learned quickly that building something of my own wasn't a straight climb. It was a series of stumbles, scrapes, and stubborn steps forward. And every time I felt the weight of someone's doubt, I thought of Ryan's smirk, and my grip on the rope tightened. The first pitch meeting was over in 20 minutes. I'd worn my best suit, printed a neat stack of business plans, and rehearsed until I could deliver my slides without looking down. The investor listened politely, nodded a few times, and then said, "It's a solid idea, but it's not for us." I left with the paper still in my bag, feeling like I'd been told no without being given a reason. The second meeting stung worse. I'd barely finished my introduction when the man across the table interrupted to ask about my real job. When I told him this was my real job, his eyebrows rose in quiet disbelief. By the fourth rejection, I'd stopped wearing my best suit. It felt like armor that no longer worked. My answers were sharper now, my slides leaner, but the responses didn't change. Too risky, too early, not enough traction. Each no left a deeper mark on my finances. I maxed out one credit card, then another, just to cover basic expenses and keep the business moving. The savings I'd once guarded so carefully was now a thin line on a bank statement. Even friends who'd once cheered me on grew quieter, their supportive texts replaced with cautious questions. "Have you thought about going back to a steady paycheck?" Some nights, I stared at the spreadsheet tracking my dwindling runway and felt my chest tighten. The numbers didn't lie. If something didn't break in my favor soon, I'd be forced to shut it all down. But each time I thought about quitting, Ryan's voice echoed in my head. Dead-end job. No stress. I'd left that life for a reason. I couldn't go back, not yet. It was close to midnight when I finally shut the laptop. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the walls. I sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out like a losing hand in a card game. The math didn't lie. 2 months, maybe 3, before I'd run out of money entirely. My chest felt heavy, my head buzzing from too much caffeine and too little hope. For the first time since I'd started, I let myself imagine walking away selling the equipment, shutting down the website, calling it a lesson learned. The thought was oddly quiet. No drama, no shame, just a tired surrender. I stood to refill my glass of water, and that's when I noticed the email notification on my phone. Subject line: inquiry regarding your services. I almost ignored it. Probably spam. But I opened it anyway. A small business owner across town had found my website and wanted to discuss a potential order, not huge, but big enough to cover next month's rent. It wasn't the windfall I'd been dreaming of, but it was real. Someone, somewhere, believed enough to reach out. I sat back down, reread the email, and felt a flicker in my chest. The surrender that had seemed inevitable only minutes before now felt premature, maybe foolish, maybe stubborn, but I wasn't ready to fold. I typed a reply, my fingers steadier than they'd been in weeks. I'd be happy to meet, I wrote, and hit send. The bills were still there. The numbers still grim. But in that moment, I remembered why I'd started. And for now, that was enough to keep going. The meeting wasn't supposed to be different from the others. I walked in with my folder of materials, my carefully rehearsed pitch, and a polite smile I'd learned to keep even after hearing no for the 100th time. But this time, something shifted. The company's operations manager actually leaned forward as I spoke, interrupting not to dismiss me, but to ask specifics: pricing structures, delivery timelines, customization options. Her pen scratched notes across the page while I talked, and with each nod, my pulse quickened. When I finished, she closed the folder slowly. We've been looking for a partner who can move fast and adapt to our needs, she said. I think you're it. It took a beat for the words to sink in. So, you're saying yes? I'm saying send us the contract. I kept my smile measured until I was back in my car. Then I let out a laugh that startled even me. The kind of laugh you make when a door you've been pounding on for months suddenly swings open. The contract was bigger than anything I'd imagined landing. At this stage, steady work for the next year, enough to wipe out debt and give the business real breathing room. I signed it that night, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing this was the moment the tide began to turn. For the first time since I'd started, the future felt less like a question mark and more like an open road. The payment cleared on a Thursday morning. I stared at the number in my account, half expecting it to vanish if I blinked too quickly. After months of watching the balance shrink to dangerous lows, seeing it swell felt almost unreal. For a moment, the temptation was strong to stash the money away, finally exhale, maybe even take a break. But the contract wasn't just income, it was a foundation. And foundations were meant to be built upon. I started small, a part-time assistant to handle administrative tasks so I could focus on landing more clients. Upgrading the clunky software I'd been using since day one, which had slowed every process to a crawl. Renting a shared workspace where I could meet with clients without apologizing for the peeling paint in my apartment. Each decision felt like a gamble, but also like a declaration. This isn't just surviving anymore, it's scaling. Some friends thought I was being reckless. Shouldn't you keep more of that for yourself? They asked. Maybe they were right. But I'd learned something in the valley of setbacks. Comfort doesn't grow a business. Risk does. By the end of the month, operations ran smoother, leads came in faster, and I'd hired my first full-time employee. Seeing someone else believe enough to tie their livelihood to my vision was humbling, and it sharpened my resolve. I wasn't just building a business now. I was building something that could outlast the memory of every laugh, every doubt, every careless word that had tried to keep me small. It started quietly, an unusually quick turnaround time here. A custom solution there. Our clients noticed first. Then, their competitors noticed they were losing bids to someone who could deliver faster, adapt quicker, and still keep quality high, while bigger companies were bogged down by bureaucracy and slow decision-making. We operated like a speedboat cutting through cargo ships. We didn't try to match their scale. We beat them on flexibility. I made it a point to talk directly with clients, skipping the scripted pitches and offering solutions tailored to their exact pain points. Word spread faster than I expected. Contracts that once felt impossible to land now came looking for us. One industry blog wrote a short feature calling us the newcomer rewriting the rules. That single article led to 3 new clients in a week. But the praise didn't come without friction. Larger competitors began undercutting prices, warning potential clients that we were too new to trust. I knew the subtext. They felt the shift. Instead of folding under the pressure, I doubled down, streamlined operations further, trained my small team to handle complex projects without extra layers of approval, and kept our communication so transparent that clients trusted us over established players. We weren't just playing the game anymore. We were changing it. And the industry was starting to realize that the underdog wasn't just nipping at their heels. We were lapping them. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers. Every table, dressed in white linen and glassware that caught the light like prisms. I'd been invited to industry events before, but this was different. My company's name was printed on the program, nominated for the Innovation Award, a category usually reserved for firms with decades of history. I took my seat near the stage, nerves humming beneath my calm exterior. Across the room, a flash of familiarity caught my eye. Ryan, he was laughing, with someone at a neighboring table, his suit sharp, his drink held like a prop in an old photograph. I hadn't seen him since the BBQ. The ceremony moved quickly. Categories passed, applause swelled and faded, and then my own came up. The presenter spoke about redefining service models and reshaping client expectations, phrases that had once lived only in my business plan. And the winner is... a pause. My name. For a heartbeat, the sound in the room blurred into a single rush. I stood, walked to the stage, and took the award from the presenter's hands. It was heavier than I expected, cool and solid. When I glanced back toward my table, I caught Ryan's expression, eyebrows slightly raised, smile gone still. No smirk this time. I thanked the team, the clients who'd taken a chance, and in a way I doubted he'd catch, the people who had underestimated me. Then I returned to my seat, the award resting on the tablecloth between the silverware and the untouched dessert. The night was far from over, but the victory had already settled deep. I didn't need his approval. I'd built something bigger than that. The opportunity came wrapped in an email from a business contact I'd met at the gala. A major corporation was looking to offload one of its underperforming divisions, small, outdated, but with a decent client list. On paper, it was a risky buy. In my gut, it felt like a door swinging open. I dug into the details. Revenue had been declining for years, the department plagued by low morale and outdated systems. Still, the bones were good. With the right overhaul, it could fold neatly into my company's operations, instantly expanding our reach. Then I saw the staff roster. There, buried halfway down the list, was Ryan's name. It should have rattled me, but it didn't. If anything, it sharpened my focus. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was a calculated move that made perfect business sense. The personal twist was just extra. Negotiations took weeks. I kept my interest quiet, moving through back channels, reviewing contracts late into the night. When the deal was finally signed, I felt the weight of it settle in my hands. This wasn't just growth, it was a full circle turn. I didn't call Ryan. I didn't tell the family. The paperwork spoke for itself. By the time the announcement went public, the department he worked for no longer belonged to the corporation. It belonged to me, and soon. So would the authority over every decision that affected him. The first staff meeting, under new ownership, was scheduled for a Monday morning. I arrived early, letting the unfamiliar office space settle into my awareness, the dated carpet, the muted hum of computers, the cautious glances from employees as they filed in. When Ryan walked through the door, he didn't notice me at first. He was mid-conversation with a coworker, his voice carrying the same easy arrogance I remembered. Then his eyes landed on me at the head of the table. He stopped short. "Morning, everyone," I began, my tone even professional. "As you know, the department has been acquired by my company. I'll be overseeing operations directly during the transition." Murmurs circled the room. Ryan's expression didn't change much, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. Recognition layered with disbelief. I moved through the agenda, outlining the restructuring plan, the new systems we'd be implementing, the standards we'd be holding from now on. I addressed every team member by name, acknowledging their contributions and setting expectations. When I came to Ryan, I didn't linger, simply noting his role in a project review I'd be leading next week. There was no gloating, no pointed remarks, just the reality of the new hierarchy, made clear without a single unnecessary word. By the end of the meeting, the shift in the room was palpable. People looked at me differently, not as an outsider or an upstart, but as the person steering the ship. As for Ryan, he kept his gaze on his notes, jaw set. The irony was self-evident. The cousin who'd once mocked my dead-end job now reported directly to me. And that truth didn't need embellishment, carried its own quiet weight. The quarterly review was a routine I'd repeated with every team lead. But Ryan's slot on the calendar carried a different kind of weight. I'd spent weeks gathering reports, feedback, and project data. It wasn't about proving a point, it was about holding him to the same standards as everyone else. When he stepped into my office, he wore the polite mask I'd seen him use on clients, the one that smoothed over arrogance with charm. "Let's make this quick," he said, settling into the chair across from me. I slid the first report across the desk. Missed deadlines, incomplete deliverables, client complaints logged and unresolved. Each page was a mirror, and with each one, his smile thinned. "These are isolated cases," he said, leaning back. "They're a pattern," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I pointed to the timeline, the consistency of the issues. 3 months, multiple projects, same outcome. He shifted in his seat. You're making it sound worse than it is. I'm reading the numbers, I said. And so will anyone else who looks at these reports. The air between us grew heavier. I could see him searching for a way to spin it, to turn the conversation toward excuses or distractions. But the data was unyielding, laid out in black and white between us. This isn't personal, I added. Every person in this department is accountable for their work, including you. For the first time in the meeting, his gaze dropped to the table. He didn't answer. I closed the folder. We'll discuss next steps in a follow-up meeting. For now, I wanted you to see the full scope. He stood, slower this time, and left without another word. The door clicked shut, leaving behind the quiet echo of something that had shifted. Old balance of power finally gone for good. 2 weeks later, the decision was final. HR had completed the documentation, and the file sat on my desk, its manila edges neat and impersonal. Inside, the formal language reduced months of underperformance to a few clinical sentences. Ryan arrived on time, jaw tight, hands shoved in his pockets. He didn't sit. So that's it? He asked, glancing at the folder. That's it, I said, opening it. The role requires consistent results. That didn't happen. My tone was measured, the same one I'd used with every other termination, calm, factual, leaving no space for debate. He gave a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? I met his gaze. I've been waiting for the work to speak for itself. It did. The silence between us stretched. I picked up the pen, signed my name on the line, and closed the folder. Then, almost as an afterthought, I added, guess this job wasn't quite the dead end you thought it was. His eyes flickered, just for a second, before settling back into that practiced indifference. But the hit had landed. I handed him the envelope. With the official documents, he took it without another word, turned, and walked out. When the door shut behind him, I let out a slow breath. Not from satisfaction, though there was some of that, but from the release of a moment I'd been carrying since the day on the lawn when he'd laughed in front of everyone. It was over now. Not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with a signature. The office was quieter than usual that afternoon. A few murmured conversations drifted from distant cubicles. But the usual hum felt subdued, as if the building itself had absorbed the tension from earlier. I gathered my things slowly, slipping my laptop into its case, stacking the papers on my desk until the surface was bare. The award from the gala still sat on the shelf in my office, its glass edges catching the light. I left it there not as a trophy, but as a marker. When I stepped into the hallway, I could feel eyes following me, some curious, some respectful. A few nodded as I passed. They didn't need to know the details. People could sense when a story had reached its turning point. At the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished metal doors. I looked, steady. Not the person who'd once left a family BBQ early to hide their embarrassment, but someone who had faced every obstacle and built something lasting out of it. The doors opened. I stepped inside, pressed the lobby button, and let the soft hum carry me down. When I walked out into the late afternoon sun, the air felt lighter. It wasn't just victory, it was the kind of closure that doesn't demand applause. The chapter was done, and I was already walking toward the next one. The next family gathering was smaller than the summer BBQ, just a dozen of us around my aunt's long dining table. The air smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, glasses clinking softly as people passed dishes from hand to hand. Ryan was there, quieter than usual, speaking only when spoken to. I didn't avoid him, but I didn't seek him out either. My seat was across the table, between two cousins deep in a debate about holiday travel. Partway through the meal, my uncle asked how work was going. I took a sip of water, feeling every eye turned toward me. It's been a good year, I said simply. A challenging one, but worth it. Someone asked what I meant, so I told them about leaving my job, starting my own business. The rough months, the breakthrough, and the recent acquisition. I left out names, dates, and unnecessary details, letting the story stand on its own. I guess what I learned, I finished, is that the opinions people have about you aren't permanent. They're just snapshots in time. If you keep moving forward, you can change the picture completely. A few relatives nodded, some smiling, thoughtfully. I glanced at Ryan. His gaze was fixed on his plate, but I caught the way his fork paused for just a fraction longer than usual. The conversation drifted back to holiday plans, but the moment stayed with me. I hadn't told the story to win points, or reopen old wounds. It was a reminder to them, and to myself that resilience is its own kind of quiet power. By the time dessert was served, the lesson had already settled into the room, unspoken but understood.